Minister for Education. I call Peter McReynolds.
I do not have the power to repeal Article 4(1)(c). That would be a matter for the Assembly. I am presently considering whether I will bring any such proposals to the Executive.
Mr McReynolds.
Minister, this is an issue that I raised with you on the 30th of April. Why has nothing changed in almost a year?
Mr Speaker, this is an issue where there has been differing views expressed, and particularly by those who are in our schools that have to navigate what can be very difficult challenges. That's why I moved to have a working group established, invited participants to be part of that in order that we can look at what guidance could be provided for, and obviously the outworkings of that would provide a better understanding to then take a decision as to whether or not this article would need to be repealed or should be.
Question 2 is withdrawn. Call Dan Armstrong.
Mr Speaker, thank you.
Mr Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to group my answers to questions 3 and 8 together. I condemn the disruption caused by the recent school closures due to security concerns, and I welcome the speedy response from the PSNI. Our young people and staff should be able to attend school without concerns about their safety or security. The Department's building handbook specifies the use of CCTV in schools with respect to building and site security, and is for the protection of school premises and grounds against vandalism and theft. The handbook also provides for an intruder detection system and external lighting to be provided for school security purposes. For new build schools, consultation with the PSNI Crime Prevention Design Advisor and the Architectural Liaison Officer takes place on all aspects of site and building security from an early stage of development. If existing schools have concerns about their existing security infrastructure, they should submit an unavoidable minor works application supported by a PSNI report. Guidance on security and personal safety is available on the Department of Education's website, and the Education Authority's Health, Safety and Emergency Planning Service are also available to provide schools with information and guidance. And while this guidance was originally introduced in 1997, it remains relevant and is largely current. However, I am happy, Mr Speaker, to commit to a review of the guidance to ensure that it remains appropriate and up to date to mitigate the risks in today's world.
Ms Armstrong.
Thank you for the Minister for his response, and I welcome your condemnation of the security hoaxes and also the steps you are taking. Can I press the Minister on just the issue of communication with parents and stakeholders in the event of any unfortunate future security alerts? What steps you will be advising? Thank you.
Minister.
Can I thank the member for her interest in this issue, and also the question in light of the security threats that came through by way of an email. However, that advice was obviously that it was a hoax, and schools were able to reopen again. Obviously, when it comes to communication, schools are very well placed to be able to advise parents of any circumstances that may require a response from the parents, including if they need to come in to collect their children. That is something that schools should have in place.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Apologies, I missed the first part of your answer. I'm just really wondering whether there are any capital funds that your department would consider putting in place, particularly for those smaller rural schools. And I should have declared an interest. I am a parent of a child that was impacted by the school closures. 2 of my children go to a school that was closed in Ballycastle, but particularly those rural schools who might not necessarily have the large infrastructure of security and have very open sites. Will there be anything in terms of a capital fund for those schools?
Mr Speaker, so where there is a need for any capital, that can be brought forward by way of an unavoidable minor works application, and obviously that would be considered in terms of any security measures that may need to be provided in a particular school. So if a school feels that they need some security infrastructure, I encourage the school engage with the relevant managing authority and bring forward those applications, and then they can be considered.
John Bunting.
I'm grateful to the Minister for this information, because he'll be aware that particularly with secondary schools there are a number of entrance points to the schools, and also certainly within my constituency there's at least one school that has several different buildings. The Minister has indicated that there may be funds available and people should apply. Could he indicate how schools apply for this associated funding for security for their estate?
So it would be by way of a minor works application, an unavoidable one, and that then would be then considered through the normal processes. And each school is different in terms of what would need to be developed. It would need to be tailored to their own unique circumstances. So schools are well placed to know what it is that they feel is necessary by way of any capital investment around security-related equipment, and then they should engage through the Education Authority, put forward that application, and then it can be assessed.
Order.
Minister, for your answer so far. Minister, understandably, those calls and emails caused a lot of stress and concern for parents. Does your department feel at this moment in time all of our schools in Northern Ireland are adequately prepared for emergency situations, events or threats? And will you be revisiting the current protocols around this matter?
Sure.
So, Mr Speaker, where there is a security incident, there should be a security policy in place where schools have that strategy, setting out how to deal with a wide range of issues, and that can range from security of cash, personal property, personal safety, incidences around violence. The school's response to any incident should be led by their safety strategy, and while it's not realistic to plan for every possible situation, the safety strategy should set out appropriate responses which can be implemented in an emergency.
Ciara Ferguson.
Thank you. 4.
Minister.
Integrated design team for the project to improve access to St Brigid's College was appointed on the 2nd of April of 2025 this year.
Ms Ferguson.
Thank you to the Minister for your update. Minister, as you're aware, the demand on the physical resources within the school is extremely challenging. Just for instance, in visiting the school and seeing the likes of the toilets, no ventilation, they're 50-year-old toilets in really bad condition, and likewise change the facility, the disabled parking, taxis. Can you ensure that it's really full comprehensive approach will be taken to St Brigid's College to improve accessibility for all students? Thank you.
Minister.
So, Mr Speaker, the good news being that the ICT has now been appointed, that they will take forward, as the group that has the relevant expertise on this, the works that would be needed in terms of St Brigid's. So that now does allow things to commence. There was a business case in terms of specialist provision classrooms, the associated accommodation at St Brigid's as well. That business case was for a 5-classroom specialist provision extension, total costs of around £4.5 million, and that was received in November of 2024. But due to the level of cost, it's currently with my department's economists for review before submitting to my Director of Finance for consideration. So we don't have a complete timeline for works in respect of that particular aspect as to needed in St Brigid's, but there is progress that's being made, and I'll continue to seek to make that progress.
Michelle Guy.
And thank you to the Minister for his answer so far. Can I ask the Minister how will ensure that any physical works required in order to allow a pupil to access a new placement at school in September 2025 will be completed before the start of the new academic year?
Minister.
Well, works that need to take forward, obviously there's teams involved in what would be necessary to take forward particular works in a school. That's actively monitored by the department, by the Education Authority. So where there are commitments for work schemes to be completed by September, then there will be effective monitoring of that, and if it's not going to happen, then it should be being flagged up to both the school but also to the department.
Patsy Midlone's not in his place. I call Declan McAleer.
Question 6, please.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Council for Catholic Maintained Schools, as the Planning and Managing Authority for Catholic Maintained Schools, has indicated that it will seek to increase the admissions and enrolment numbers at Dean McGurk College via the development proposal process under Article 14 of the Education and Libraries Order of 1986. As a statutory process, CCMS will work with the school in this regard. The DP process can be separated into 4 main phases. 1, the identification of need in the area planning process. 2, the pre-publication consultation. 3, publication of a DP. And 4, the statutory objection period leading to a decision by the Minister. I should point out that the Department's role in the DP process commences when a proposal is published. On the 16th of January this year, the Education Authority published its second operational plan, 2024 to 2026. Dean McGurk College features in the operational plan under a short-term work stream, which says that the Council for Catholic Maintained Schools is reviewing the approved admission and enrolment numbers for Dean McGurk College. The Council for Catholic Maintained Schools will engage with the Board of Governors regarding provision for the area. So while this work is ongoing, the school does, Mr Speaker, remain able to apply for temporary variations to enable it to increase its intake whenever there is oversubscription in the area.
Mr McAleer.
I thank the Minister for his response. I should declare an interest as a former pupil, former teacher and current parent at the school of 2 children. Minister, do you have any indicative timeline at all as to when this development DP process will commence and indeed when it might conclude? Because the school was built in 1966 and there's an urgent need of capital investment.
Well, Mr Speaker, I know the member has pursued this issue very effectively and has raised the issue with me on a number of occasions and continues rightly to do so. On the 9th of May of 2024, last year, I met with the Council for the Catholic Maintained Schools along with other elected members, departmental officials and representatives from Dean McGurk College to discuss the admissions and enrolment numbers at the school. CCMS subsequently did indicate that it would bring forward a DP to seek to increase the admissions and enrolment numbers at the school through the DP process, and that they would work with the school to bring this forward. So I've mentioned the reference to Operational Plan 2 in terms of the reference to Dean McGurk. So it's not possible for me to be able to put a specific time frame on bringing forward the DP. That process is a statutory one, and there's a number of steps that need to be carried out before it can be published. So the initial steps in this case, Mr Speaker, has to be carried out by CCMS, and then it has to be carried out by the Education Authority. At that stage, as I've stated already, it is the Department's role in the when the DP process commences that a proposal is published, and then my department is engaged in that process.
Colin McGrath.
Number 7.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the priorities for youth policy review commenced in September 2023. My department is taking a co-design approach to the review, which includes children and young people, the Education Authority, which is the statutory provider for youth services, youth work practitioners, the voluntary and community sector and other government departments. My officials are gathering, reviewing and assessing evidence from a broad range of sources, including a young person's reference group, a regional advisory group, a cross-departmental group, 5 thematic subgroups, the project board, the Education and Training Inspectorate, relevant research reports and other policy areas within the department. The review findings and evidence-based policy options will be brought to me for consideration during the summer of this year. Quarterly updates on the policy review are made available on the department's website, and the next update on the website is scheduled for later this month, April 2025.
Mr McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Thank the Minister for the answer. Can I ask, inherent in the previous priorities for youth document was the protection and enhancement of the voluntary sector as being the leaders in the delivery of youth work within our communities. I'm not always sure that the Education Authority actually delivered upon that policy element of the previous document. Could the Minister assure us that the voluntary sector that is delivering, that is the most flexible within our communities to meet the needs of our local children, will still get that prevalence and will be able to deliver quality youth work?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the point that Mr McGrath makes is one that I've heard repeatedly from a number of the community groups that I engage with, but it's also one that I can speak to from my own constituency point of view, where I see how the voluntary community sector do excellent work when it comes to youth services, and that's why I am very much keen to make sure that they are enabled to do their work, and where they can do that work, then there shouldn't be the need for statutory provision, because the voluntary community sector are able to do it. So there is always going to be a role for statutory, absolutely there will be, but this review is currently working through all of the various aspects that I've just outlined. Once we get to that place where there is a policy, then of course that will be subject to a public consultation process, and that will give a further opportunity for community and voluntary groups to have an input into shaping this policy.
Trevor Clark.
Answers thus far, and I hear your response in terms of going through a consultation process and whatever, but is there any indication about how long that will take before there's a launch date for the policy?
Sure. So, Mr Speaker, the time frame, and I've questioned my own officials around this because I would like to see things expedited more quickly. However, A number of the voluntary community groups have indicated that they need to get this right and they would rather go through the detailed work on this. And that is why the time frame is slightly longer in my view than what I would like it to be, but it is hoped that there would be a launch in early 2026. So we need to get the proposals to me in the summer. We need to then take decisions, put that out to a public consultation. That needs time to work through, but the objective is obviously to move towards having a launch of this in early 2026. But the sooner all of the key stakeholders can move forward in this process, I want to enable the outworkings of this policy, but I am dependent on all of the various organisations playing their part to aid me.
Matheson.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answers. I really just want to pick up in a bit more detail from Colin McGrath's question and your response to that. Will the priorities for youth policy, when it is published finally, will it clearly set out the Department's policy on whether or not the community and voluntary sector is to be the primary delivery mechanism for youth services in Northern Ireland?
Mr. Speaker, I can't predetermine the outworkings of the current processes that are being engaged in. I want to enable an effective youth policy. I have my own view on that, but that view has to be shaped by those who are actively engaged in this important work. So the direction of travel that the member indicates is one that I have a lot of sympathy with, but there needs to be the detailed work taken forward, which is currently underway. That process then will allow me to be engaged, and we move forward into a consultation process, and members in this House, as with other organisations, will be able to help shape that.
Owen Tennyson.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as you'll be aware, my department is operating within an extremely constrained capital budget. Within these current budget constraints, minor works are restricted to Ministerial Priority 1, which are those works that meet the inescapable statutory requirements such as health and safety, fire protection, safeguarding and statutory obligations under the Disability Discrimination Act. Schemes which meet those requirements are prioritised for delivery, although the timescales for delivery will vary depending on issues, for example, like the state of readiness, in terms of the need for planning approval, the logistics of delivery. So some projects can only be delivered when pupils are not on site, limiting the window to holiday periods, typically during those summer months, and the availability of funding. So some small-scale projects can be mopped up at the end of the financial year if there is available funding. Unlike major works or school enhancement programme projects, minor work projects are initiated on an almost daily basis to address inescapable concerns. The minor works programme, therefore, needs to include a degree of flexibility to respond to those emerging priorities.
Mr. Tennyson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that answer. Minister, Bridge Integrated Primary School in my constituency submitted an unavoidable minor works application in June 2023 and has been awaiting a feasibility report and business case since. Do you accept that school leaders' confidence in the minor works system has been shattered, and will you commit to a review to restore that confidence?
So, Mr. Speaker, a lot of the issues around confidence questions are being raised by members in this House who actually created a false narrative, created inaccuracies, and therefore, where there is a lack of confidence in the process, it is for those members that created it. I am absolutely confident in the processes that have been followed. And therefore, the answer to the member's question is no, I won't be committing to a review. It's a matter for others if they feel they need to review their processes. The Education Committee can carry out their own review around these particular aspects. But to ask me to initiate a review based upon a false premise is something that I don't have the resources available to waste my time on.
Johnny Buckley.
The Minister is absolutely right to highlight that the biggest undermining of confidence is false information from members in this democratically elected chamber. So can I ask him to confirm that again that this is currently being allocated only to priority 1 cases, and could he perhaps set out a further context about why that is at this stage?
Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that it is around priority 1 cases. The reason for that being, I outlined earlier, but it's to meet the inescapable statutory requirements such as health and safety, fire protection, safeguarding, statutory obligations under the Disability Discrimination Act. And projects are also progressing to provide the minimum accommodation required to implement approved development proposals. So, as members will appreciate, the Department is operating within an extremely constrained capital budget. Decisions have necessarily been taken to direct available investment to keep schools open, pupils safe and to provide education access for the most vulnerable. So, Mr Speaker, I very much want to be able to fund not just the school that Mr Tennyson has raised today at question time, but many members in this House who bring me to their constituency advocating on behalf of their schools. We can only spend what is available to be spent, and that is dependent then on the budget allocation that my department receives. So I encourage members, advocate on behalf of the Department of Education and help us to put in that funding into our schools community, rather than advocating for a new canteen for prisoners in McGilligan. I would sooner have the funding spent in our schools. That's where the priority should be.
Question 10 is withdrawn. Call down Dodds.
Mr Speaker, in recent years there has been an unprecedented increase in the number of children with special educational needs. Since 2019, the total number of children with statements has risen from 19,000 to 27,000, and there has been a 21% rise in pupils attending a special school, with many operating at or beyond capacity. As part of my statement to the Assembly of the 30th of April in 2024, announcing the establishment of a SEN capital investment programme, I announced that one of the 4 strands of the programme would focus on the development and delivery of SEP projects at special schools. I set out that there are currently 10 SEP projects announced in special schools, and these projects will be prioritised and expedited for delivery. I can confirm that this does not mean that the mainstream SEP projects have been paused or placed on hold. However, at present, the SEP projects at special schools have been prioritised, with resource directed to take forward these schemes. Regrettably, this has meant that the programme of mainstream projects has been prolonged. However, the EA is currently exploring options to increase its resource to take forward SEP programmes in mainstream controlled schools as soon as possible. And I can assure you that there has been no change to the policy regarding SEP. Funding continues to be available to progress SEP projects through the design stages to pre-tender. A decision to release projects to tender for a contractor will be taken on a case-by-case basis, dependent on budget availability at that time.
Mrs Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. It is good to hear that some of the SEP programmes in mainstream schools are still being progressed, but progress is slow. And I know that you will agree with me that many of these schools become very disheartened. They have extremely challenging accommodation needs, and I would be keen to explore or for you to explore what additional resources the EA need to actually progress the cases. For example, in the case of Carrick and Lurgan, been waiting almost 10 years for that business case. So I'd be keen to know what we can do further to progress this issue.
Minister. Mr Speaker, the member has had me in Upper Bann on a number of occasions where I've been able to see schools and around these SEP projects. So I can assure the member that my department and the Education Authority are actively working to consider how processes could be accelerated, because I share the frustration that the member has raised. I have also indicated to EA that where they require additional capacity to help move these projects forward, that I want to be able to assist them and for my department to be able to assist them. So that work is underway. I want to see these projects move forward. We need to get to them to the point where they are sitting ready to go. Then it is another battle in order to secure the funding, but we first need to get a lot of these projects to the point of being shovel ready, and then I can engage in seeking to get the finances, and currently there's too many projects that are not at that stage.
Annie Donnelly.
Thanks to the Minister for his answers so far. Could I ask the Minister to outline how he will ensure that schools most in need of emergency works will be able to access this via minor works?
Sir. Mr Speaker, I encourage the member to engage in the significant amount of applications that are considered and processed. They are substantial in terms of the volume. The Education Committee will know that, having looked into this particular issue. These are all priority 1 cases. I think that's indicative of the financial pressures that the school estate is under. Countless reports are indicating that there needs to be much more investment in our school estate. That's what I want to see achieved. Decisions that are taken are delegated at appropriate levels within the department, within the Education Authority. Those decisions follow the proper processes in terms of how they are reached.
All Crawford.
The Minister for his answers thus far. Minister, will you commit to publishing a quarterly update on SEP progress, including which schools are prioritised and why?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's a good point, one that I ask my own officials to provide me with updates on the capital programme. I think there is a strong argument to be made that could be published and made available so that people can see the transparency around the process and also help keep people informed. So that is something that I'm actively considering in terms of setting up a process to provide that information.
Question number 12.
Mr. Speaker, academic selection supports the principle of parental preference in education, a principle that underpins the legal foundations of the education system in Northern Ireland. For every study that criticises academic selection, there is one that highlights the shortcomings of comprehensive education. In England, for example, the shift from selective grammar schools to comprehensive education did not improve social mobility as intended, and rather selection by ability has been replaced by selection through postcode. Work by the Centre for Economic Performance within the London School of Economics shows that among the reasons for low social mobility in England is poor access to high-quality schools by economically disadvantaged groups. The increase in house prices near high-quality schools means that even though choice is available, poorer parents cannot make use of it because they cannot afford the catchment areas with inflated house prices. So there is no societal, political or academic consensus on academic selection. We can either continue to have these same tired old conversations trying to socially engineer better education outcomes and setting school sectors against each other, or we can focus on what the evidence tells us is important. The most fundamental feature of an education system which promotes social mobility is one in which every child is able to attend a good school. That's why my new Transform Ed strategy sets out the most detailed and systematic programme of transformation in over a generation, which will make Northern Ireland a truly world-leading education system. It provides a pathway to educational excellence based on supporting effective teaching and a renewal of curriculum, assessment, qualifications and school improvement, all underpinned by a relentless focus on tackling educational disadvantage. So let's focus on building that truly high-quality school system where all of our children and young people can flourish.
Mr. Duggan.
Obviously, the flourishment of our young people is something that we all desire. However, I don't think you see many or any reports that have much good to say about putting children under such pressure at such a young age, while previous ministers essentially privatised this process. Can the Minister acknowledge the role that private tuition now plays in so much that it's become de facto and puts so much pressure on so many parents and children and has created an unequal playing field?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the points the member makes can be debated. It is one that I have some sympathy for, that the decision to abolish academic selection by the state led actually to the privatisation of the transfer process, which I find quite ironic for those who advocate greater state control. So that is one I have a lot of sympathy for. And that's why some parents say, why can we not sit these exams in our school environment? Why can it not be regulated by the state? So there are points of conversation and debate. However, I suspect we're not going to reach consensus. And if I spend the next 2 years debating this particular issue, then we miss what I think is critically important, which is to ensure that every child is able to access a good school. That's why I published my Transform Ed document, which is very much at its core about closing the attainment gap between those who come from a more socially deprived background compared to those who are better off, as the member quietly outlines, is able to engage in private tuition to help aid their child.
Paul Robinson. Minister, you have about half a minute.
Mr Speaker, it was announced on Friday the 28th of March that following individual consultation with members, the NITC was not in a position to ratify an agreement on the management side's revised formal offer to resolve the teachers' pay dispute, and then a second pay offer was rejected. That's why, Mr Speaker, I personally intervened, took control of the situation, met with the trade unions, put forward a proposal that braked the deadlock, and now as a result of that action, our teachers are getting that 5.5% increase, and they will get their backdated pay in May of this year, and it is something that I know that the teaching profession has very much welcomed, and we continue to work on the issues that they raised around workload.
Moving to topical questions, and I call Cara Hunter.
Minister, understandably, the error from the EA distributing letters to parents on preschool placements has caused great distress, leaving many parents devastated to learn they'd not secured a place for their child and scrambling to make alternative arrangements. Minister, can you detail to this House how many children in Northern Ireland currently have been left without a nursery place, and will you commit to delivering necessary funding to ensure that these families can avail of a placement within one of their preferred nurseries?
Minister.
So I agree entirely with the member around the regrettable information that was put out in advance of what was meant to be later this week. The Education Authority, having looked into it, engaged with the company who was responsible. Version 1, they apologised. They were seeking to prepare themselves for releasing that information this week, and it would appear down to human error they released this information in advance. That was wrong, and they've apologised for that. So it did create considerable distress, as it often does at this time of year. But as a result of the earlier information being released, there would have been, I think, less, certainly in the preschool settings, disruption, because they were still working through trying to find resolutions to that. And so the Education Authority is currently working through making sure that we provide places for every single child in Northern Ireland.
Ms Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Minister, for your response. Can I ask, what action will the Department take to ensure transparency and fairness in preschool place allocations, particularly in rural areas like my own constituency, or it's equal and fair, given the Education Authority's recent policy change on pupil allocation notice and the impact of the standardisation programme?
So, Mr Speaker, the member again rightly outlines that the Education Authority is responsible for the allocation of numbers, the PAN number, to providers. That is something that annually takes place, and that can change, and that does create instability in some of those settings, but they're actively trying to manage the number of places for the need in our community, and they need to make sure that there isn't oversupply. So this year, the circumstances have not been satisfactory in terms of the information being communicated. We're trying to investigate and understand how that happened. But I also accept what the member has said. That's why I've now commissioned a review into the process of allocating numbers to preschool and nursery providers. That's a piece of work that I've asked EA now to take forward to see, is there a better way for this process to operate rather than every year members in this House and the Department having to deal with the issues that have been brought to my attention.
Keith Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the Minister indicate the consequences of the request for an extension of the committee stage of the Uniform Bill to 3rd of December 2025?
Yes, Mr Speaker. The committee stage extension that will be debated later today in the Assembly would have the result of not having the legislation taking effect until September 2027, were the committee to follow its inefficient approach that it seeks to do. So it is vitally important that later today in the Assembly we support the amendment that's been brought forward. The committee and the committee chair on this one is absolutely wrong. The first priority has to be hard-working families. They must be our priority. The committee then needs to reorganise its workload, do what they are elected to do, which are members of the Legislative Assembly, carry out its scrutiny work in a much more efficient time frame than what is being proposed to do, and that they put the interests of hard-working families first not seeking to deny the DUP implementation of our manifesto pledge, which was to deliver on this education. They shouldn't play politics on this matter. They should put hard-working families first.
Mr Buchanan. Thank you, Minister, for a wholesome response. Minister, with respect to scrutinising the bill by the committee, what other options are open to them?
Well, Mr Speaker, they could work harder. I think there's a realisation out there from the public that they expect this place to get on with its job. And I note in September 2024, 27th of September, whenever the consultation went out on the school uniform bill, this was the chairman, Mr Matheson, and I quote him, "This is an issue which has gone on for too long." I agree. Too long, and yet he wants to bring forward a proposal that would lead to legislation not having effect for 3 years from he made that statement. So I think the Alliance Party need to sit back, ask themselves, why are they here? Are they here to just frustrate and delay this assembly? Or are they going to allow me as a minister to get on with the job and deliver for hard-working families? So I'll be supporting the amendment, and I trust that the Alliance Party will support the amendment rather than frustrating the work of this assembly.
And on the subject of frustration and delay, does the Minister accept his share of responsibility for the delay in reaching a teacher pay settlement just last week?
Well, Mr Speaker, I was delighted that we were able to reach an agreement when it came to teachers' pay. This was a commitment that I wanted to deliver on. When I first came into post, a new recruit coming out of our teaching training college was paid £23,000 a year. As a result of a DUP education minister, new recruits now will start on £31,650, £7,500 paid per year more than whenever I wasn't in this particular post. So I'm delighted that we've reached an agreement. I welcomed the trade unions, and I would refer the member to the trade unions' press releases where they thanked me as Education Minister for my intervention. I would encourage him to listen to those unions who actually were praiseworthy of the work that I carried out.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I believe the Minister lives on another planet and mustn't have been engaging directly with teachers and support staff recently who are not happy with where this situation has landed. So can I ask the Minister, what steps is he actually going to take to address the workload issues and caseload issues that those teachers have been raising?
Minister. Well, Mr Speaker, again, maybe the member is incapable of reading and he might want to go back to school and then he can read the agreement. The agreement has 26 areas of workload. That was the commitment that management side entered into with the teaching trade union. So not only have we delivered a 5.5% increase, we have committed to 26 areas around workload, so we have listened, rightly so. And then I intervened and said, let's set up a commission. We'll appoint 3 members to it. It will carry out oversight, it will report to me, it will hold not just me and my department to account, but others, so that this is delivered upon. So, as an Education DUP Minister, I have engaged, I have listened, and I have delivered, and will continue to do so.
Trevor Clark.
Of their special schools, or sorry, the number of special schools that are still requiring places allocated to the pupils?
Well, Mr Speaker, this is an important issue and one where we continue to engage with the Education Authority on. As we have identified the need in September 2025, we believe that there's a requirement of around 1,300 places in order to accommodate the need that exists. So whilst the Education Authority has been working to increase the majority of the capacity across the school estate, there is an assumed pressure of around 400 places remaining in advance of the new academic year.
Mr Clark.
I ask you, Minister, I mean that number is quite high, but what steps are we taking to actually reduce that number and allay the fears of that large number of parents?
Sure. So, Mr Speaker, this is an issue that there's ongoing engagement. Indeed, over the past week, this week, we have the most senior representatives in the Education Authority, the Chief Executive Directors, actively meeting with schools in areas where need has been identified in order to provide those assurances that where they engage with the Education Authority to enhance the provision in their school, that they will be supported, because there is a concern in some schools that they aren't supported whenever they make provision available, and so EA is currently engaging in that outreach work with the schools. The SEN Task Force, which was established last year. It will be meeting on the 16th of April, where my most senior officials, Permanent Secretary, Deputy Secretaries, they are also part of that task force to make sure that whatever support that the Education Authority need, my department is there engaging with them, because we need to ensure that every child who should have a place will have a place for the next academic year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Can you give us an update on any of the actions taken since the launch of Transformed?
Minister. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, following the launch of the Transform Ed strategy, there's been a number of important announcements about assessment and professional learning. Working with SIA, we've introduced a new system-level sample assessment in literacy and numeracy for pupils at the end of key stage. This mirrors arrangements in many high-performing jurisdictions. The new tests will involve a representative sample of around 1/3 of schools. It will begin in March 2026, and that will provide important data on how our system is performing in these areas. And it's an area, Mr. Speaker, which the trade union representatives have welcomed, because it will assist in reducing workload for teachers because of the involvement of SIA in terms of the assessment. I've also announced a new programme called Making Best Practice Common Practice, and that aims to bridge the gap between academic research and classroom practice. Transform Ed contains a specific action to improve access for teachers to educational research. The Making Best Practice Common Practice programme includes 3 key elements: funding for school and school clusters to support research-informed conferences, a monthly newsletter for teachers on the science of learning, and a quarterly Northern Ireland publication for teachers on wider education research. Most critically, my officials are working on a detailed implementation plan to support delivery of the Transform Ed strategy over the next number of years. This will identify lead organisations and delivery mechanisms, as well as funding requirements. Officials are engaging with stakeholders to discuss the plan. And this week, finally, Mr. Speaker, I'm issuing a new Transform Ed magazine that will keep school leaders and teachers updated each term on the programmes and reforms that are being taken forward as part of the Transform Ed strategy.
Mrs. Dodds.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. I think that all of us in this House recognise that excellence in our schools and throughout the whole of our education system for all of our pupils is really, really important. What do you see as the long-term stages in this process?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I concur with the remarks made by the member? She is absolutely right in terms of the importance of excellence, and the next stages on the Transform Ed strategy will be a detailed implementation plan to support the delivery of the strategy over the next number of years. This will identify lead organisations and delivery mechanisms, as well as funding requirements. Officials are engaging with key stakeholders to discuss the plan. I'm also delighted that the inaugural Transform Ed conference will be held on the 8th of May. This event will bring together school leaders and policy makers to provide an opportunity to engage directly with global education experts, learn more about the reform agenda. Speakers will include members of the International Ministerial Advisory Group, such as Daisy Christodoulou and Tim Oates. Lucy Crehan will also present key outcomes from the strategic review of the Northern Ireland curriculum, offering a first look at potential changes that could redefine education in Northern Ireland. This conference, Mr. Speaker, will be a huge event. We already have over 500 principals who are going to be coming in attendance to that. I expect that number to increase, and we anticipate having 800 educationalists on that particular date as we move forward our education system in Northern Ireland.
Paula Bradshaw.
An update on your discussions with the Health Minister to ensure nursery provision is restored to those special educational needs schools where it has been withdrawn. Thank you.
So, Mr. Speaker, it's an issue where the Chief Nursing Officer has been commissioning a piece of work for allied health professionals that operate within our special schools. It's an area that I've engaged on with the Health Minister, and will continue to do so, and we're awaiting a report in terms of how that work is being taken forward, because I've heard those concerns from those principals about the need to have that support within our special schools.
Ms Bradshaw.
Mr Speaker, Minister, given your support for this process, what support can you give to those principals, leaderships of those schools in the interim while that work is undertaken? Thank you.
So, Mr Speaker, obviously there is support for our special schools, but they're managing increasingly difficult medical complexities. The pupils who are coming forward, thankfully, they are living much longer than used to be the case as a result of advances within the medical world. But that requires support to take place then within our special schools to enable the principals to, first and foremost, provide an education for those young people. But that will only be possible where there is the appropriate medical support. And some of the principals who I have met are deeply concerned that they're reaching the point where they don't want to say to a child, you're not able to come into the school because the medical needs that you have cannot be catered for. That's not a tenable position. It's not something that we will want to be the case, and that's why we need to get the appropriate support, and I'm working to seek to do that with the Minister for Health.
Okay, thank the Minister for Education. Now we turn to questions to the Minister of Finance, and the first question is from Doug Beattie. Mr Beattie. Sir.
Creation of the centralised next HR function in 2017